So thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Doug Cook, and it's great to see some familiar faces out there. I'm the Education Events Coordinator for NOFA Mass. And tonight we're excited to present with you Native Praxis, who is joining us as we start this presentation about community garden organizing. At first, I'd like to thank all the NOFA Mass staff and board members who have helped make this workshop possible. We thank our sponsors, the Neighboring Food Co-op Association, a regional federation of 40 food co-ops and startups celebrating 10 years of working toward the vision of a thriving regional economy rooted in a healthy, just, and sustainable food system. The website to learn more is www.nfca.coop. Most importantly, we want to thank you, the viewers and listeners, especially our members who make our education and advocacy work possible. Please consider becoming a member or making a donation to support our important work. I want to say thank you. I appreciate you all being here, and we can take a moment to acknowledge that we're sharing this space together. Take a nice deep breath and let it out and feel our connection to our place and our body. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Praxis. Native Praxis has been urban farming around his home of New Haven, Connecticut for about 10 years, including 4 full years of working as a farmer environmental educator for Common Ground High School. Currently, his organization, Root Life, offers organic produce and plant seeds and vegan and hair care products and quality environmental services for people in the local as well as global community looking to efficiently enhance their interactions with their natural environments. Okay.
Thank you indeed for that introduction, Doug.
Thank you very much for joining.
Indeed, facts. Welcome everybody. First up, I want to thank everyone for having me here. It's an honor to be in a position where people want to know about the work that is getting done on the ground that I'm helping to facilitate. And so I'm excited to share with you the experiences that I've had with particularly urban community gardens in New Haven, Connecticut in particular. And I'm just going to get right into the presentation. Yeah, so we can have questions afterwards, so that's fine. Okay, cool. So, all right. The overview for this is I'll be talking about 6 different community garden spaces that I've been directly involved in co-creating or creating just myself. And hopefully, as I'm going through these different spaces with you all, what we want to focus on are these questions on the right. What factors define a community garden? Are all community gardens created equal? Do all community gardens serve the same purpose? And how can I or you start and maintain your own community garden? Again, I want to emphasize that my experiences in an urban environment, particularly New Haven, Connecticut. Some of you may be familiar, but it is a city, definitely a major city in the Northeast. Moving along. So just wanted to like kind of give some visuals of like just community gardening experiences. So all these pictures are from random different spaces out of those 6 spaces that I named. And just looking, I can go through real quick and just kind of like share. There's a drum circle on the top left, moving right. This is a trellis build out of bamboo that happened recently this year at one of the gardens, and we'll get more into that. There's an herb spiral where we have some children planting with our community garden coordinator, Nadine, is the next picture. You see the babies in the garden. Definitely have young farmers for certain. You see some of our interns on the next row actually seeding up for not just that community garden, but all the other community gardens. I move in a connected way with the work that I do. And since it's all in the city that I grew up in, it's kind of been easier for me. And we can talk more about that. Um, we have some first time carrot harvesters, and they were rainbow carrots. We have some more seeding happening at the Soldier Market, which is a community garden in the middle of literally the hood where we're from, which is an amazing thing to say and proud to say so. Sweet potato harvest, first time. Um, The next row, you see things like the community gardens being used for other things. So there's like a Reiki session about to happen as like, we're expanding the garden beds in that space. And then there's also, I think, like some tarot reading happening in the background as well. Um, if you move over, you see the harvest of the cayenne peppers happening at the community garden and people connecting. All these pictures I get are candid, literally. Um, and then you see, the children connecting with some of our Yale students. See children in the background harvesting the herb spirals. See elders way in the back, sitting at the table, chopping up the watermelon to share. See the creation of the herb spiral. And let's see. Oh, you see Tim particularly meditating, laying down, just sunbathing in the garden. And then you see my three sisters in the background, no pun intended, having engaging in a wonderful conversation together. They all just met each other, which is amazing. You see some lettuce harvest going on with a few different people. We see one of our regulars harvesting kale and enjoying that therapeutic experience. And then the last slide is you see at the Concat Garden, which is the youth program garden, and I'll get more into that. You see the youth literally taking to harvesting the collards and the chives, I believe, that were in between, and really feeling proud about that experience. And this was a program that wasn't intended for agriculture, so that's very interesting. So just wanted to give you kind of like a concept, and this is like a 1 second snapshot of like a 1 million minute video that I've documented around this community garden work that I've done. So just wanted to give you a span of what I've been able to cultivate um, in short. And now we're going to get into the details of each garden. So this one is the first garden, and I didn't have as much footage as I would have liked for this particular garden. But this is the Valley Place Community Garden. And this garden is particularly special for me because it's actually, if you look at the second picture with the gentleman in the red with the corn, in the background, that house is actually where I still live to this day and where I was born and raised. So starting this garden literally was on my block. Um, at a time when there weren't a lot of active community gardens in New Haven. So this was in like 2016. And I just was able to secure resources from my job at the time, which was Common Ground High School. Some of you may be familiar. It's an eco-friendly high school in New Haven connected to a state park with a small market garden and farm on it as well. So it was an interesting experience for me. So I was able to take some of the resources that were just sitting around there and get the support to start a garden in my neighborhood, which is a cul-de-sac. So cul-de-sac is like a dead end street that turns around. It's like a half moon almost. If you drive up it, you'll come around and come back out of it. So in the middle of the cul-de-sac were two islands, and I was able to put 10 raised beds, 4x8s, and then like, different shapes like herb spirals and medicine wheel gardens. And there's like a form of decoration. And this was like my first community garden. It was an extension of my yard actually, which was like 10 beds deep. Um, and I literally like use the hose from my yard to water, which is important to talk about. And we'll talk about that later as far as site considerations go. Um, and the key points that I wanted to bring out about this garden is it was led by myself. This is my first community garden. I literally did all the work, set it all up, like planted all the plants. It was like just an extension of the work I was doing anyway, so it wasn't that big of a deal to me. And it was something that I wanted to get out to the community that I literally was born and raised in. So I knew most of the neighbors there. I didn't know the new neighbors. I knew the people who owned the houses and things like that. So it was intended to just serve the block. I wanted to like just be able to have people come and pick what they wanted. It's like 22 homes on this particular block. And I say that because it's different for every community garden. This is answering the question: are all community gardens created equal and used for the same reasons? So what I would like to say about that, and just being honest with everyone, this completely backfired on me because I did it all by myself and I just did it like literally thinking that I had a certain level of buy-in in the community. I rent this home. I've been renting it for so long, like all my family has. So there was no like property ownership, and not really understanding the dynamics of like property owners and like neighborhood associations and like their standards and their rules and regulations around what they consider aesthetically pleasing and what's not, and what they think may bring down the property value, um, and vice versa. And mind you, this is in 2016, before the whole the mass influx of minds becoming conscious and aware of the importance of growing our own food organically really took off in the hoods that I'm from. So yeah, there was like literally one neighbor complaint, like a community mother to, and like literally like overnight, like city organizations and things like that came and took it all away. Luckily, it was able to be redistributed to other community gardens that were happening. But it kind of broke my heart because I was doing this out of the goodness of my heart for free, as I'm getting paid as a farmer, decent money. I was literally volunteering and just it's like, hell, just come pick, like, you know what I mean, or send your kids out and like let them learn. And this was happening, but again, one person. All it took was one person because I didn't go about it the right way and like really getting the buy-in outside of like just word of mouth, because I knew these people. Um and like not having something solid to be like, nah, this is like really backed. It backfired very quickly, like overnight downward spiral. So I just wanted to put that out there. There is a happy ending to this, and we'll get to that. But that's something to really think about, because it's a lot of energy around like, hey, let's just start a community garden, like just do it and like deal with the energy around like laws and regulations later. And it's like sometimes, or even more often than not, that can backfire you. That also depends on where you're at and your local laws and regulations and how they're like enforced. But in New Haven, this is what happened. So moving on to brighter days. So in 2017, at the end of 2016, I left Common Ground. I prepared myself intentionally to be able to give my services back to my community. So I started Root Life. And when I did Root Life, the New Holeville Community Management Team had reached out to me. And I don't know if you guys have community management teams in your townships or cities, but basically, if your town is separated by different like neighborhoods and they have like certain names like the Bill or something like along those lines, I think everywhere has a Bill or a hill somewhere. But like the actual like is an actual group of people that are representative of that neighborhood, and they go to like talk to the city, and secure resources, and just enact things that people who feel like they don't have a voice in the neighborhood can come to and get like projects done, or support for like starting businesses and things like that. So they reached out to me because I had just started Root Life and I had a little buzz. And they had mentioned that they had got access to a community farm, Star Street Community Garden. Oh, this is in New Haven. Um, and it was an interesting experience because this one was a New Haven Land Trust Garden, now better known as Gather New Haven. They merged with New Haven Farms. I know this is kind of like New Havenish, but just wanted to put that out there. So the Land Trust is like an organization that was really tight with the city, like pretty much the only organization that was really tight with the city, able to really secure like empty lots that were city owned and turn them into community gardens. It's very hard to do that in New Haven just by yourself, just calling and saying you want to start a community garden. They're literally going to give you the runaround and tell you that the spaces are preferred to be for residential building and development, even if they haven't been used for the last 20 years and they're not going to get used for the next 20 years. So like if you there's certain organizations that you just literally go through, and the land trust was that. Um, and they will secure the land for you, make sure the water access is there, and they may even give you materials depending on the budget for that nonprofit organization. Um, so uh, the group reached out to me. It's a group of about 8 people and their children, and they were given a third of this like the second largest farm, like community garden in New Haven, and it's been there for like decades. And the people that were used to running it were getting a little old, and unable to like just do it on their own. They didn't have anyone that was coming behind them that wanted to take on the task. So the land trust decided to like give this group a third of it in the back, and work it out with the people who were already there. Everyone's from the same neighborhood though. This is interesting, right? So what ended up happening was, yes, we have a harvest. You can see in the top picture, people are happy. They're growing things they've never seen before. Winter squashes, um, and like different things like that. Lots of greens, and they're like bringing them home and they're cooking them, and they're impressed that they were able to do that. On the bottom screen, we have like local schools coming through and learning how about the garden. So again, this was my first real like contracted job. It didn't pay a lot, but I'm a community person and I was happy to be there. Um, and what I wanted to emphasize about this community garden, which was important to know, is that it was a divided use between the community space. And on the surface, it seemed all right, but then there started to be certain tensions around like, are you trying to take over this space? Um, you do your thing, we're gonna do our thing. So like that division of community gardens. Side note, for me, a community garden is not a community garden for me if everyone is not sharing in on the work and sharing on the harvest. Community gardens that are divided, like you get your bed, whether you're there or not. Like you have this is your bed. You may be gone for the whole summer. No one touches your bed, and all you can grow is like what you can grow in a 4 by 8 foot radius. You kind of barter with your neighbors if they with it. Um, if you guys are ever even in the same space at the same time, versus like we all come, we all take care of the beds there and we all share in the harvest and whatever we don't take home we donate. That's to me more of a community garden. The actual word community just hints to that more than just um, like ownership, property ownership of a 4 by 8 bed. So yes, just saying that because the dividedness kind of caused a little tension. So this only literally lasted for a year, a whole grow season. But people and also the people that were in this community management team weren't necessarily looking to like do anything in gardening and farming beyond just reconnecting to their roots. So that happened, and then they moved on. That makes sense. Moving forward, I was able to go to another land trust garden across town, um, and this is the Welly Edgewood Beaver Hills Community Management Team Web, and this was in 2017. This is um, next to an armory. So if you look at the top picture, that brick building in the background is like the New Haven Armory. It's an old like arms factory that has historical reference, but it's like caving in, like type energy, and nothing's being done with it at the moment. So the team went and reached out to the land trust, and they decided to have this space. And then I was invited in shortly after for my expertise as a farmer. Um, this was easy for me to be invited in because I've documented my work ever since I started farming. If you check out my social media, which will be at the end of this presentation, you can see and you can literally scroll back to all these things happening, like videos and things that I put together. So it's easy for people to see like what I have to offer, and see if like that's what they want to actually see. If that makes sense. So it's used for various types of community programming. So we've had like yoga, meditation. We've had sound bowl healing. We've had Thai massage. We've had uh, I'm drawing a blank right now. There's lots. Let me think about it real quick. Um, whew. We've had like community discussions around like racial equity. We've had all types of stuff, and I'll think of more as we move along. But yes, drum circles. We've had all like literally all types of connecting of the community and the space, and it's nice to like do all these things in a green space where you can take your shoes off, lay down comfortably, be surrounded by all the greenery, giving you fresh air, in the middle of a neighborhood. And another thing I want to say about Armory Garden is like, if you're looking at the picture of the at the top, if you're coming like inside the screen, the direction towards us as you're looking, right there next to it is a juvenile prison. So the energy is just changes the dynamic of this block. Um, Across the street is a park, and right next to that is my high school, Hill House High School. So it's like it's very like neighborhood oriented. It's a church on the other side of the street. So it's very like community oriented. And these spaces can be utilized in a way where it may seem like it's just like a carved out space in the armory, but the intentions are to connect to these different, like the school right there, the park right there, the church right there, and to make it one big space, even though they're separate entities. But you can still like utilize it like you have like a lot of acres of land in a rural area if you really are connecting to your community, and not just adding something there, not really connecting to the people who are already there existing there. Um, so it's also used for small scale ag entrepreneurship. So Root Life definitely did programming out of their workshops around like anything dealing with agriculture. But also I co-founded an organization in 2018 called Love Fed New Haven. Um, and in that we were able to actually like utilize like a third of the garden to do our own CSA, um, which provided free food to residents of the community, because other people who weren't residents of the community were supporting and just like donating so people can get free food. And we also had grant funding to back that as well. And that was very successful. We also did a youth program for young adults. Um, and that was the training. They were like 18 to 24 college students from Quinnipiac University, Yale University, Southern Connecticut State University. Um, and we all got together and were able to learn more about food justice and learn how to grow food, no matter where we're at. So small scale ag entrepreneurship has happened. We also were able to bring people in. So the bottom picture with our friend Andrew, I believe he gave a presentation for No for Mass not too long ago. He's showing us how to use recycle pallets, the right pallets, he treated to create garden beds. And we still have a garden bed in that garden today from his example. And people have been using this technique moving forward. So just being able to bring in people to give that training all in the community garden space, literally with people who are intimate and wanting to like utilize it in real ways. It attracts people beyond the immediate neighborhood, especially this community garden. So some of them are like, like if you're not from there, you won't even know that garden exists. But this one is very attractive for some reason. And we get people from all walks of life coming through, from elders to babies, literally newborns, all races, all types of universities. Again, people who never went to school, people who graduated from Yale, everyone who graduated from a different college. But like, there's a real diversity of demographics that comes to this garden. People from in the middle of nowhere just stop by. And they might have seen it in like the edible nutmeg or something, and they're like just stopping by, just like just check out the energy and are amazed with that energy. So that's something that's really important that was different from the other gardens. And the food distribution is beyond the immediate neighborhood as well. This garden produces a lot of food, more so than the the regulars can actually take home and utilize. So there's a lot of like distribution to like other like organizations who are good with distribution. And then there's like a green box pantry that's there where it's just like a shelf with like all plant-based things. Excuse me, y'all. Helicopters are flying by. But yes, so there's like the green box pantry, which is something to look up as well on social media. Um, that was there so people can just walk by any time of the day and whatever's there for them they can take. And just people bringing it to like their local churches or something like that because there's just so much extra food. So what I will say is like one of our biggest problems last year was like how do we distribute all this food? And that's a good problem to have. Like we have everything else in order. Like now here's our bounty. Like how do we like really like distribute it beyond just the myriad of people who are here, but we have extra. Like we don't want to just compost it. So um, that's something to think about. And there was a lot of green job creation. So even beyond like the small scale ag entrepreneurship, like I was hired to be the community garden manager, and I was paid very fairly indeed, and lovingly for that position to this day. Also, do the small scale ag entrepreneurship, we were able to hire um, other interns and pay them to help take care of this garden during the week because we have one day work days, which is on Saturdays when we come together, and it's more like fellowship indeed. But people work, but it's really like a fellowship, almost like going to like your religious center and having that family dynamic without the heavy influence of talk about religion. Um, Next up, so in 2018, Root Life and Love Fed partnered with Concat, this Connecticut Center for Arts and Technology. Um, and that literally was just a conversation where somebody put us in front of the programs director, random meeting. I showed them my social media. We said that we wanted to do a program around agriculture for the youth. I already had documented myself doing these things at the jobs that I worked at prior, and they were all for it. The leadership there saw the need to reconnect to the land, particularly in our community. And so that's what we ended up doing. This particular property was interesting because it was on a commercial space, commercial business area, where there's a lot of different businesses around it. And it wasn't owned, but it was rented by the nonprofit. So they, had pretty much clearance to do whatever they want there, even though they still had to run it by the property manager. Um, it's not an agricultural focused organization. What they offer is adult programming around culinary certification, medical coding and billing, and phlebotomy. Um, and then they have like youth programming, which could be anything at any given time, like after school programming. So depending on the teachers available and their expertise, it can be like STEM, it can be like media, it can be like dance. It could be anything. I've seen so many different programs and they all were successful. But it all depends on the people who are able to actually show up. Um, and so agriculture became one of them. So Root Life took that over. And as you can see in these pictures, there's a lot of joy happening with these youth who've never experienced like garden food, let alone growing it. Um, because it just is the dynamics. We come from like a area where there's lots of corner stores, like you know what I mean. And we've even had a discussion around that, as far as like what does that mean and why is that even a culture in certain places. So they were super excited to see somebody that was them 10 or 15 years ago, which is me. I grew up the same way they did. Um, Actually taking on something that was non-traditional, like being a farmer. And they looked at me, somebody who was very cool, so it just hit differently. So here at the top, we have some kids who literally skipped a trip to like the park or something like, or some big field trip to stay back and help me build the garden beds. That had came that morning. It was very interesting. And they were like super excited to do that. And so they learned how to use a circular saw and a drill that day, and we built these 4x8 wooden garden beds. Um, on the bottom again, there's a harvest with these young ladies who that day, the goal was to come into the garden and make a flower bouquet for your parents, out of like the garden food. So using like the leaves as like the fluff, and then getting some of these flowers, brassica flowers, radish flowers in the middle, as like the decoration of the bouquet. And they were so excited about that and gave it to their parents. Um, and then on the right, you see um, one of my youth holding a tray of microgreens, which I taught to all my youth. I want to say I taught like over 200 youth at this particular program. It's probably way more than that. But At least that. And they all learned how to like grow with the indoor tent underneath lights, how to set it up, how to like weigh out the microgreens, document the process, grow them, sanitize them with food grade hydrogen peroxide, salad spinner, dry them off, package them, create their own labels, and solicit sales. And like for kids, like if you make $5 in a day off of like, serving up microgreens, which is like salad and plants to them, it changes their dynamics. So after the second week of going through this process, like I could just sit back. Like my days were very easy. They were waiting to get to to package up more product to sell so they can ironically take this money and go to the corner store, even though Barbara D was teaching what he was teaching. So I just wanted to like, emphasize these different things. It was interesting because again, it wasn't agriculture focused, but this was an organization that backed it anyway, and it was a super success. It was Garden was created intentionally for youth programming, even though some of the food harvested by the youth went to their cafeteria because they have a small restaurant there. So it was like a farm to table aspect that they were able to use for their business, while still engaging the youth during the youth programming to help out with that. Education was the main focus, not necessarily like producing to like give out to the neighborhood. And there was like definitely some green job creation around that. Just the assistants that they hired to help the facilitators. I had ag assistants because my program was agriculture. And also like I was getting paid to do this particular job. So um, that was an amazing space to still up indeed. And then it's like super expanding. And next up, 2020. So here's the Sojourn Market. So what's special about this space is uh, the uh, the Love Fed program that I said we had with the young adults, the college adults from 18 to 24. One of them, Tim, actually was able through his nonprofit, Nose Dove Inc., secure a space on the corner of a neighborhood called Garden Street. And it's like literally right across the street from the neighborhood substation, right across the street also from a school, K through 8 school. And the space is empty because the house burned down a while ago, but the property owner um, still owned the space, didn't want to really build on it, but didn't want to give it away because it was a gift from her deceased husband. So in honor of her deceased husband, like Tim and her came to an arrangement to make it into a market space which focused on local vendors being able to offer like plant-based, sustainable health and wellness products to the neighborhood. Um, and so that was the focus. I was recruited to help in a way of like adding the agriculture piece to it, and creating like a true market garden, not in the sense of what we might read in the books though, but like a grassroots type market garden where it's like, hey, I may be selling you some plant-based products like a solve or something with a certain type of plant in it, like dandelion or clover or things like that. But we wanted to throw an aspect of a demo garden. So we have 4 beds going right now, 4 by 8 beds. And we have like tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, collard greens, cabbage, corn, black eyed peas, sweet potatoes, um, and a few more things, but all intentionally like culturally relevant to this block, which is predominantly black and brown. Um, and so I feel like it was important from my experience to connect people to the actual things that they are used to eating, maybe in unhealthy ways, but it's like this traditional, like it's part of like the culture of the family. And so we did that. There's also a wall around the perimeter of like these um, 1 by 8 garden boxes. They're like 3 boxes high though, and they have herbs in them. So at the top, you see one of the neighborhood youth coming out and being super excited about planting. I think that's like lemon balm right there. It's lavender next to it. So we have like all these walls with like aromatics as people walk by. It's a very busy area. Either the breeze will get them or they're invited to touch through signage to help just calming smells, and also like engaging in things that like, yeah, this is edible, you can try it, and the kids eat this up for certain, and adults big it up for certain, even if they're still wary of just trying some random like leaf from a plant. um, so yes, agriculture is mainly for connecting to other aspects of the market and general education. um, it's a community event space, so like concerts that go on there, cookouts, like we give away free food almost every week, because we have gotten funding for it. Free healthy food, introducing people to eating healthier diets, intentionally choosing things that we know they're gonna like love. So it's good to see um like the old lady that's like, yeah, like I'll try your type of food, it's free, like, oh, you will really blend with my son who's on this wave as well. And then like taste it and come back for like thirds and be like, let me call my son real quick, like, son, I get it, like, you know what I mean? It's like it's amazing. And it's also like, amazing to see that that's all it took was like, like being a taste tester first and really like introducing something beyond just for your health, but like it's gonna excite your taste buds. And it's easy to do that again if you're like serving the communities that you come from, because Um, and ag-related entrepreneurship definitely exists there. Again, so it's a space that's utilized for more than just growing food or distributing food, like traditional community garden spaces may be perceived to be. And then last but not least, as far as the 6 community gardens I'm involved in, this one is very new, like a month old. Um, And this is very special because this is 2 doors down from the house that I showed you in the first slide. It's at a community center right next to a police substation. Again, which is interesting. These marginal connections that are happening of green space next to uh, like places that are like not as popular in 2021, and bridging that gap because the police officers come through and they big it up and they support and they help, and like they're there as well. They're like people when they come through these green spaces and not like in uniform, if that makes sense. And that connecting those gaps, like that's real in a real way. I think nature connects everyone. So that being said, 333 Valley, wonderful angel number, right? I never noticed it till now, but in the back of the community center is huge. If you look at the bottom picture, like that's like half of it, the scope. Again, across the street is a school again, which is interesting. And like all the way in the back, on the back left, you see like those trees looking kind of like mountainous. Like that's a state park called West Rock State Park. So the view is there. So the intention for this space, and there's a lot of like energy in it because this is spearheaded by our local alderman who is from the neighborhood, was born and raised in the neighborhood. And the alderman has access to like resources that most like just grassroots groups don't have, particularly like through the city and just through connections of having to be in everyone's face, and like being friends with like bosses of like Park and Rec and things like that. Like they're able to really like get their vision across and get the support that they need. So shout out to Miss Honda for that. And like as you can see, we just like started planting some of our herbs. We had some interns from Common Ground come through, so that was like a full circle thing. And again, this is 2 doors down, literally 2 doors down, like a 60-second walk from me walking outside of my house. So it was like, hey, the neighborhood garden that I was longing for actually came back in a much bigger and better fashion. Um, and it was spearheaded by the people this time. And I'm still, heavily involved in making it work. So there's a youth program going on this summer around it as far as continuing the creation of it. There's going to be motion going to like set the path lines. There's going to be a whole like the Yale School of Environment is coming through. Where we have some meetings and we're planning and we have the resources to do a whole meditation garden um, space, which is going to be like very amazing. And then yeah, that's and the distribution for this is particularly for the entire community called West Hills or the 2-5, depending on where you're from. These names mean a lot, so allow me to use them, please. Indeed, and so yes, that's happening right now. Um, and again, that state park aspect is amazing, especially for the meditation. But even if you just want to go and get a little bit more nature, it's right there. You can cut through, hop a couple fences, and be in the state park, literally. Um, so those are the six. And now I want to get to the nitty gritty of which everyone came here for, to really discuss these things. So starting your own community garden, where do I start? So community engagement is very important, and I wrote these in pretty much chronological order. Some of these are interchangeable, but community engagement is first. So engaging with your immediate neighborhood and community. Again, the first slide that I said is very important to like have enough people on board, and that could be in like petition form or really like knowing that people are down for it, they're going to come out and contribute, so they're down for it, versus like you just doing your thing and one day they just don't like it because it's an eyesore to them or something like that, and that switches the dynamic. So really like engaging and letting them know what it's about and why it's important and like why they should show up in a real way. Engaging local nonprofit organizations and social enterprises. So a couple of the gardens that I said um, were giving to the groups through a local nonprofit called Gather New Haven, or formerly called the New Haven Land Trust. So if you didn't know that, you may have went through the runaround of, especially in New Haven, of trying to get it and being discouraged and not getting it, not knowing that there are organizations that can get that process done for you. There are social enterprises like again Concat, which is a nonprofit. It's a community center that has nothing to do with agriculture or community gardening. That there was a community garden allowed to happen there, which changed lots of lives in the neighborhood. Um, and then community management groups. I think I said like these are the groups that still have a direct line to the city usually, and city resources. Um, and so do neighborhood aldermen and other types of city reps in your neighborhood. City resources are abundant. Yes, they are like definitely fought for, but they're there. And uh, especially in 2021, there's a big push on a federal scale, on a state scale, and on a local scale to increase urban farming in particular, and to reach underserved neighborhoods in particular. So this money exists. Some of this only comes from a municipality type funding. Others come from like private nonprofits. But yeah, so getting to know them, and also like just the resources that aldermen have, like or city reps, like they have teams of people who go and knock on doors to get them to vote for them. Like they definitely have teams of people that go and knock on doors to deliver free groceries. Like, you know what I mean? Like these things can be reutilized in different ways. And everyone can win from that. So let's move on to like resource procurement. Grassroots fundraising campaigns, so like local and online, so online GoFundMe, Kickstarter, Facebook fundraising. There are a lot of third party ones now that are not as famous, but you can go find it on your own. And then it's like local fundraising, having events, having a cookout, like like old school, selling dinners, or like like really utilizing that community cultural energy. There's also like 501c3 partnerships for grants. So some people, a lot of people who are like interested in like just farming and getting into nature and everything may not be as interested in like all the administrative work that goes into starting a nonprofit and maintaining good standing with a nonprofit. But that 501c3 status gets grant funding, which can make a huge difference. But there's something called a fiscal sponsorship, and there's also different types of partnerships that go with organizations where for fiscal sponsorship on average like a 5%, or average from my experience like a 5% fee, but you have access to like securing like tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on your your ability, your skill set, your level, and your luck. um but so partnering with organizations, and like they may just be good with like supporting you in the background. They may be good by having their name on something that's so positive, or maybe in alignment with what they're already doing, and you just may be a group or a person that can handle a project that really helps them out. So there's ways to like partner around that. Requesting support from local garden-related businesses, i.e., Home Depot, Lowe's, Walmart, garden nurseries, local farms, etc. Asking for like seedlings, asking for like free like garden tools, shovels, hand shovels, weed whackers, um, asking for like wood, like to build stuff. I know like Home Depot and Lowe's like have like a community grant, like to beautify your community. If you just look that up, like Home Depot grant, Lowe's grant, and then rules and regulations. But then also I've seen people go and talk to managers and like, yeah, we're building a community garden, and they'll literally donate wood for free, because they just in the mood to do it that day. So don't knock it until you try it. In all of these different spaces, you don't necessarily need a 501c3 for them to support you in a real way. Um, and then like city township departments like Park and Rec, New Haven has something called the Livable Cities Initiative, which is who you would call to actually get a space. It's like who New Haven Land Trust calls to secure a space, because they're actually the city organization that's in charge of it. Park and Rec is usually in charge of like having like they have extra wood chips and mulch, and like they may have extra wood, or they may have extra like leaves. They may be able to come landscape their garden if it's too much. Like if it's still on city property and it's like easy enough for them to landscape, and they were doing that anyway when it wasn't anything. So these things like matter. There may be other things in your cities or townships that you literally have to go look that up. All right, and I believe this is the last slide to translate. So keep this in mind. Uh, Site considerations. So in New Haven, in a lot of urban spaces, in the Northeast and just in the U.S. in general, are like have contaminated soils. No way around that. U.S. is crazy as far as the amount of contaminants out there. I think I was reading a book called Environmental Racism, and it just hits like so much. There's so much out there that we're dealing with. But usually you'll hear about lead, mostly mercury, arsenic, um, mainly as far as like soil contamination, and in urban areas, almost always because of the lead paint and the lead industry and how they like ignored the obvious and they really put out an agenda to like get people to use lead paint because capitalism. Um, a lot of our housing um, was used, lead paint was used, and it like it chipped off the housing, and it ended up in the soil, and lead doesn't break down in that way in the soil. It remains in its like form, and it's like absorbed easily, particularly by young children, but by adults as well, and it affects brain development. Um, as far as like IQ, as far as like literally physical brain development. It can cause organ malfunctions. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I'm not going to get too deep into it. So basically, like soil testing is key, but if you soil test most likely in an urban area, it's just going to tell you that you have to live there. So that's why I like raised beds, pots, garden like structures. Like I use the bricks. You can use cement blocks, anything that you can build like a frame, put some landscape fabric down to separate the actual grow bed from the soil that's been contaminated, and like fill it up with outside soil that is not contaminated with all these things. Organic is very key. If you have a lot of money, you can literally just without the garden bed, like cover the whole space with landscape fabric and like just start from scratch and like build up. So adding like mulch and things like that, and over the years, you can build your soil up. Um, and sunlight and shade, especially if you're not like a super farmer or gardener. Some people may be like, oh, there's no sunlight so I can't grow plants. That's true for like maybe tomatoes and peppers, but like you might still be able to grow your greens and your salad, which can have a big impact on your neighborhood. So don't be discouraged if like one thing is there or the other thing is not. Just know what you're dealing with as far as like the different plants and what they need. Community aesthetics is very important for site considerations because like you don't want the community being thinking that it's an eyesore, and like to having a community energy that's against what you're doing for the community. Because it just doesn't feel good as a person trying to do something for the community or people trying to do something for the community, and it doesn't just feel good for the people who feel like it's an eyesore there. So like really engaging in the community and getting ideas and being intentional about maintaining the space. Ideally, you don't want a space to turn into a forest. If you're an avid farmer or gardener, like then you understand that forest is a pretty thing in the eyes of an avid farmer or gardener, but it may not be perceived that way for somebody who doesn't have that connection yet. Understanding the community member goals, what people want to see out of it, how they want the space to be used. That can help you design and plan out what's going on. Somebody may use it as an office space. Some people may want to do like other things that are outside of that. Some people may want the food to go here, go there. So having those conversations are very important so that there is no discord amongst the group that's actually making this happen. Water access always important. It's easy if you go to like the land trust and they do it for you. But if you're starting something of next to an abandoned building, there may not be water there. We need water definitely to grow food. So you may have to call the regional authority, you may have to call the city to help you out. But you don't want to wait till you're like ready to go, and then like it takes months to get these things through. So always know where your water access is. Like you may have to use a neighbor's like hose. How are you going to pay them for that? Because water costs money, especially when you're using it for a garden so much. Drip irrigation helps with that, but in general, and drip irrigation is very good for community gardens. And setting your setup around that is a very important thing to do. Rodent pest protection and even like people protection because we're dealing with urban areas and some people may not value the space like other people do. There is probably going to be equipment in there to help maintain the space, and that can easily go and be sold for something else overnight. So like building some type of like barriers, whatever that doesn't have to be a fence, doesn't have to be gated away from people. It could be like a barrier of raspberries, like or it can just be like a space where community is really involved and heavily involved, like it's always lit or something like that, and like people are always watching, like that really matters in a real way. And then property owner goals and restrictions. Usually, if you're starting a community garden in the urban area, at least in my experience and people that I know who have done it, like you don't really own that property, but you may be able to lease it for a while, or you're like somebody else owns it and they're letting you utilize it just because they're not doing anything else with it and they have a good heart. but what are their goals? Like, is it in return for you maintaining the space so they don't have to? Is it, are there any restrictions because they want to sell it and they don't want like certain infrastructure to come there and they have to like take it down or anything because it was a 5 year agreement? Like, and knowing that maybe it's a 5 year agreement, so maybe I don't want to plant a peach tree that's going to be like 10 years in, um, so thinking about that, and then beyond growing food, these are the last points. Health and wellness workshops. I've talked about like yoga. I've talked about like cooking demonstrations. I've talked about like sound healing meditation. I've talked about like Thai massage, getting your body in order, um, and all other things like talking about like disease disparities in our neighborhoods. All these things can happen. Small scale ag entrepreneurship is what I talked about earlier. Businesses can literally be like startups can really happen, incubated in these spaces if they're allowed to, and people are like a little creative with it. Can you use as a community meeting space, just like an outdoor meeting space, or outdoor office space as well. So like, part of that ag entrepreneurship, somebody may want to do Reiki sessions in like a green space, and here it is right in the middle of the neighborhood. You don't have to like meet somebody in a forest somewhere. It's a meditation space for community members. People come there to release from their week, and they are very vocal about that from all walks of life. And it can also be training grounds. I talked to you about internships and like main job creation. So yes, that's definitely it. I have this video, and it's just a visual of like the Armory Garden per se. This year is like one of the weeks. If you go on my Instagram, you can see all of the weeks. And it is a party.
Thank you very much, Praxis. We'll give Allison a break here while the video plays. Feel free
Yes.
to say hello in the chat, where you're coming from, and if you're involved in a community garden. And again, if you have some questions, now's a great time to start putting those in. We'll have five or 10 minutes max of questions tonight.
Cool. Nice. And oh, sorry, y'all. Next slide. Thank you, Farmer D. Here's all my information. No need for translation. D. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you. We'll leave that up there for
Okay.
another moment as people um, find you there. Again, I'd like to take this moment to thank our sponsors again, Neighboring Food Co-op. If you haven't checked them out, again, their website for more information is nfca.coop. We can continue with some questions. At this point, I think I'll end your screen share, or you can end your screen share so we can get your face on our screens. Um, so I think one of the questions that often comes up is choosing building materials. You chose, pallets, you said bricks. You know, what's the first sort of consideration you have when you're choosing your building materials?
So first off, it's like safety around like any like contaminants leaching into the food because we're talking about food in particular for this. So my first choice always is like the raised beds. And if I'm doing something that's not like a square structure, um, then I would do like bricks, because they're like small and they're like more flexible than like cinder blocks, if that makes sense. Uh, but yes, also like the factor of like what do you have available in your budget, like or in your resource deck, because these things can get expensive, and like somebody may be giving out bricks on Craigslist, and all you have to do is go pick it up versus like like I just dropped $1,000 on wood, like um if you don't have that, like don't let it discourage you. It's about being creative in what you have. Whatever you have, always creating like some sort of barrier from the ground, usually with weave fabric, and making sure that like the wood is not pressure treated because that's the type that's going to like leak out chemicals that are not good for us. Also understanding that usually the wood I use like is Douglas fir, and that may only have like a 5 year lifespan. And thinking about that in the long term, if it's going to be long term, that's more money going into repairing these things, like versus like maybe cedar may give me 7 years, but it's a little bit more expensive. So depending on your budget, on your aesthetic ideas, will determine to me what you would use to start the garden. And then like not even just like the bed structures, but like if you're doing vertical gardening, like how you create your trellises. It could be like bamboo poles as you've seen in that video, or it can be like traditional tomato like stake posts. Or it can be like how you seen the guy doing the string on the smaller stake posts. Or anything in between. Like you go get some sticks from the forest if they're like if you find enough good ones, like and utilize that, especially for a grow season. But again, it's all about like what the people want to see, the aesthetics, and what's available as far as resources and budget.
Great, thanks. And Ruth just asked a question. How did you learn what you know, and how do you pass it on to a group that has such a wide range of experience? And do you get, do you have to deal with misinformation or practices that maybe aren't as productive as some other practices?
Good question. So I literally immersed myself in a bunch of like local ag organizations, the Yale Sustainable Food Project, Common Ground High School, Yale Botanical Gardens, and New Haven Farms at the time. And all organic growing, cutting edge practices or whatnot. And I learned that way. I spent like 4 years, like literally, like as a farm worker, like happily, like like taking any task that I could to learn like the dynamic, knowing that I was going to spread this. I think a very important part for me is to help answer this question is like I was born and raised in the community that I serve, so I communicate in ways that are it's just beyond English, and I know and I have context around what people actually can relate to in that way. So it makes it easier for me to explain certain concepts that may like be textbook and that need to be translated. That's not in agriculture, but in anything in general. We're just talking about agriculture right now. And I also show up in underserved communities. So I'm showing up in spaces where like there aren't already like gardeners there. Like I'm filling in that void. Um, and the gardeners that may be there are like traditional Southern gardeners um, who are open to hearing about maybe don't use this type of like fertilizer or pesticide because it's been proven that that gives cancer. And 2021 is easy to convince somebody of that and where I'm from because like so many people are going through this and looking for answers. um so everyone is like stepping up in all their own ways, just agriculture to combat these things. So the energy is here. In the past, it was a little harder. Again, I told like at the beginning, like the garden that I started got shut down because no one saw the value in it. But now it's like they're begging for it to come back, and now it's come back in a different way. So just keeping that in mind to answer that question, I can't really speak outside of that, outside of like making it relatable to your demographic that you're serving. If you're not from there, really taking the time to get to understand and be a part of that community, so that like you can reach them and know like, oh, these people really like collard greens for a real reason. Like, so let's like take this cow bed and turn it into a collard bed, and they're both brassicas, but like the receptivity of the collard just hits different. Like it's bringing back memories, and like it's making taste buds salivate because they're like, I'm gonna take these collard greens and do something with them. When kale, it's kind of similar, but if you don't know it, you don't know it's similar. Like so being able to reach people where they're at is something very important. Hopefully that answered that question.
I think it did, yeah. And I want to respect everyone's time. We're a little after 8, so I think
Mhm.
we're gonna start wrapping it up.
Okay.
Again, thank you so much, Praxis, for all of your great insight and information. I put in a quick link to get your feedback. So if you
Thanks.
have any feedback for us, you can put it here into this chat. There's a link in the chat. As well, I want to, make sure that we show all our appreciation for our NoFaMass members. If you really like this event, please consider becoming a member or making a donation at nofamass.org. And we again thank our sponsors, Neighboring Food Co-op. It was great to see you all, and I look forward to seeing you next time.